Calvin Hart had spent most of his life believing that silence was the safest companion a man could have. It never disappointed, never demanded, and never misunderstood. At 48, he lived alone on a wide stretch of land filled with tall grass, old fences, and cattle that knew his voice even though he rarely raised it. People in town often said he was a man made of stone quiet, steady and impossible to read. But anyone who watched him carefully could see a softness that appeared in the way he cared for his animals, or how he paused whenever someone needed help loading something heavy at the supply store. He did not talk much, but he always acted when it mattered. On that cold winter afternoon, the sky was already turning gray when he stepped out of the general store with 2 bags of feed and a bundle of new gloves. He noticed the wind pushing snow across the parking lot, like small white rivers sliding along the ground. The weather was changing fast, faster than the forecast had warned. Calvin looked up, squinting at the clouds. A storm was coming, one of those sudden mountain storms that hit without mercy. He knew he needed to get home before the roads became dangerous. Calvin loaded the supplies into the back of his truck, brushed snow from his shoulders, and got inside. The heater groaned to life, sending warm air through the cab. As he drove, the storm thickened, and the world outside the windows slowly disappeared behind white curtains. The road twisted along open fields and patches of forest. But now, everything looked the same, just endless gray and white. The farther he drove, the more the wind pushed against the truck. He tightened his grip on the wheel, focusing on the narrow trail of road still visible. He was used to tough weather, but even he felt uneasy. The ranch was still miles away. The storm was growing heavier with each passing minute. That was when he saw something that made him ease his foot off the gas. Up ahead, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a small shape near an old bus stop that stood alone along the road. The bus shelter was nothing more than a wooden frame with half a roof, used mostly by ranch hands traveling between small towns. It was usually empty this time of year. But today, someone was there. Someone small. Calvin's heart thumped once, hard. He slowed the truck to a crawl. Snow whipped against the windshield, making it hard to see, but the shape didn't move away. It seemed to be huddled against one of the posts, trying to make itself smaller against the cold. Calvin frowned. No one should be out in weather like this, especially not someone so small. He pulled the truck to the side and turned on his hazard lights. The engine rumbled as he stepped out, and the cold slapped him immediately. His breath became fog in front of his face. He pulled his thick coat tighter and walked toward the figure. And as he came closer, he felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just someone small. It was a young girl. She looked no older than 12, maybe 13, wrapped in a thin jacket that was soaked from the snow. Her hair stuck to her forehead and her lips trembled. She kept her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold in what little warmth she had left. Calvin slowed, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, though his voice came out rough from disuse. The girl did not look up at first. She seemed scared to even lift her head. Then, slowly, she raised her eyes. They were wide, bright with fear, but also relief, like she had been hoping someone would stop, but didn't expect anyone actually would. She took one small step toward him, her legs shaking, and whispered in a voice so soft he barely heard it over the wind. "Sir, can I slip under your coat?" Calvin froze, completely froze. It was not the words themselves that shocked him, it was the way she said them. Not bold, not strange, not forward, but desperate. She was trembling so hard that her teeth chattered, and her hands were almost blue. She looked like she could collapse at any moment. His mind raced. He did not want her to feel scared of him. He also did not want to frighten her by hesitating. She was only asking because the cold was unbearable, and the look in her eyes told him she was fighting more than just the weather. "Come here," said softly. He opened his coat, and she stepped toward him with a trembling breath. The moment he wrapped the thick coat around her shoulders, she pressed into the warmth as if trying to disappear inside it. Calvin felt the shake of her body, the kind of shiver that came from deep inside. Not just from being cold, but from feeling unsafe. He lifted her gently, easily, because she was so light. She held onto his shirt tightly like she feared letting go. He carried her to the truck, opened the door, and helped her inside. Once she was seated, he turned the heater on high. The warmth rushed out, filling the cab. The girl held the coat around herself with both hands. Calvin got into the driver's side and closed the door against the storm's roar. For a moment, the only sound was the heater and the girl's shaky breathing. "What's your name?" Calvin asked quietly, trying to sound calm. "Emily," she whispered, still looking down at her hands. "That's a good name," he said. "I'm Calvin," Emily nodded, but she didn't look up again. She kept glancing toward the window, as if scared someone might appear out of the white wind. Calvin noticed. It wasn't the kind of glance one made simply from nervousness. It was the kind that came from expecting trouble. "Were you waiting for someone?" he asked. Emily swallowed hard. "No." Another quiet moment passed. "Did someone drop you off?" he asked gently. Her fingers tightened around the coat. She shook her head. Calvin did not push her. He knew enough about people to understand when someone wasn't ready to talk. The important thing was getting her to safety, warming her up, making sure she felt protected. "I'm taking you back to my ranch," he said slowly, so she wouldn't be surprised. "It's warm there, and you can rest. We'll figure things out after the storm passes." She nodded again, this time more quickly, as if grateful he had made the decision for her. The relief in her face was small, but it was there. She trusted him at least more than whatever she had been running from. Calvin drove forward carefully, his eyes focused on the road, but part of his attention stayed with her. Emily slowly stopped shaking as the warmth reached her skin.
Ow.
But every once in a while, she would look toward the storm again, as though searching for something, or making sure something wasn't following. The ranch was still 15 minutes away. 15 minutes through heavy snow, low visibility, and winding roads. But Calvin drove as steadily as ever, hands firm on the wheel. Emily kept his coat wrapped around her tightly, holding on to it like a lifeline. After several minutes, her voice, still soft, broke the silence. "Thank you for stopping." Calvin nodded. "Anyone would have." She shook her head slowly. "No, many cars passed earlier, but no one stopped." Calvin felt something in his chest tighten again. The idea of anyone driving past a child alone in weather like this felt wrong. Deeply wrong. But he stayed calm, not wanting to bring more fear to her already fragile state. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Emily looked at him for the first time fully. Her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something like hope. She nodded, then leaned back in the seat, still wrapped in the big coat. Calvin kept driving through the storm. But now there was a new heaviness in the air, a feeling that whatever Emily had been running from was more serious than cold weather or a missed bus. Something had scared her enough to step into a dangerous storm alone. Something had made her whisper those trembling words. And Calvin knew, without any doubt, that this was only the beginning. The storm outside had grown stronger by the time Calvin pulled into his long gravel driveway. The ranch house stood like a quiet guardian in the middle of snow-covered land, a warm glow coming from the windows. Calvin parked the truck near the porch and turned to Emily, who was still wrapped tightly in his coat. She looked calmer now, though her eyes still held that watchful, uncertain look, like someone expecting the world to shift again without warning. "We're here," Calvin said softly. Emily nodded and pushed the coat closer around herself. When Calvin stepped out of the truck, she hesitated for a moment before following. The wind tugged at her hair the moment she stepped outside, so Calvin quickly guided her to the porch. He opened the door and let her inside before closing the cold out behind them. Warm air hugged them instantly. The ranch house was simple, with wooden floors and a large fireplace already glowing in the living room. Calvin usually kept a fire going in winter, even when he wasn't home, just in case power ever went out. Today, that warmth felt like a blessing. "You sit by the fire," Calvin said. "I'll bring something warm to drink." Emily sat carefully on the rug in front of the fireplace, her hands stretching toward the heat. She looked small there, her shoulders slightly hunched, the coat still wrapped around her. Calvin watched for a moment, making sure she was comfortable, then went into the kitchen. He heated milk on the stove and added a bit of honey, something his mother had done for him when he was a boy and came in from the cold. When he returned to the living room, Emily accepted the mug with both hands, blowing gently before sipping. The warmth seemed to loosen something inside her. Her shoulders dropped a little, and the tension in her face softened. "Is it better?" Calvin asked. She nodded. "Thank you." Calvin sat in the chair across from her. He didn't want to rush her, but there were things he needed to understand. Emily began gently. "I won't ask anything you don't want to talk about, but I need to know if you're missing from home. If someone is looking for you." She stared into her mug for several long seconds. Her fingers tightened around the warm ceramic. Calvin waited patiently, just as he did with nervous calves or cautious horses. Eventually, Emily spoke. "I was traveling," she said slowly. "Someone." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My mom works a lot. She didn't want me to travel alone, so she asked her friend to go with me." Calvin listened closely. Emily's voice remained soft, careful, but not trembling like earlier. "He wasn't mean at first," she added, "but during the trip, he changed. He didn't want me to talk much. He kept saying we needed to hurry and not bother anyone." Calvin nodded encouragingly, but said nothing that might pressure her. At the bus stop, she continued, "I tried to call my mom. He didn't want that. He took my phone and said I didn't need it. I got scared." She went quiet again, though her story avoided anything inappropriate. Her fear made it clear that whatever happened had made her feel unsafe in a deep way. So when the bus stopped for a break, she whispered, "I ran." Calvin felt something inside him shift. Not anger, just a strong sense of protectiveness, breaking through the quiet layers he usually lived behind. "You did the right thing coming off that bus," he said gently. "No child should ever feel afraid of the person they're traveling with." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "Will my mom be upset?" "Not at you," Calvin replied. "She'll just be worried about your safety." Emily thought about that, and then nodded slowly. "You're going to be all right," Calvin assured her. "I'll call the sheriff. He's an old friend. We'll let him know you're safe here, and he'll contact your mom." Emily's face showed a mix of relief and nervousness, but she didn't object. She trusted him now. Calvin stood, went to the phone on the wall, and made the call. He kept his voice quiet, calm. The sheriff, a steady man named Tom, promised to head over once the storm cleared enough to travel safely and to contact Emily's mother right away. When the call ended, Calvin returned to the living room. Emily had finished her warm milk and was sitting cross-legged now, watching the fire. "Your mom knows you're safe," Calvin told her. "She's relieved." Amen. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the weight of fear finally lifting. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. "It's all right," Calvin said kindly. "You've been through a lot today." She gave a small, grateful smile. To help her relax, he turned on a soft lamp in the corner and brought out a thick blanket. Emily curled into it, looking tiny but finally warm. There was a gentle calm in the room now, the kind that came after a long storm even, though the real storm still blew outside. After a moment, she spoke again. "I kept thinking someone would stop," she said quietly. "At the bus stop, I mean. So many cars went by." Calvin sat back in his chair. "Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them. Sometimes they're scared to get involved. But you're here now. That's what matters." Emily nodded again, slowly. "I'm glad you stopped," she whispered. Calvin's chest softened again, the way it had earlier. It was not a feeling he had often not since his wife passed years ago. He had grown used to being alone, to keeping his emotions quiet. But Emily's small, brave voice brought something warm back to life inside him. As the night deepened, the wind rattled the windows, but the fire kept the room bright and cozy. Calvin made a simple, dinner-warm soup and bread. Emily ate slowly but gratefully. Afterward, she asked if she could help wash the dishes, but Calvin shook his head. "You rest," he told her. "You've done enough today." She settled back onto the rug, sitting close to the fire but no longer clinging to the blanket for dear life. She seemed calmer, more sure that she was safe. A few hours later, there was a soft knock on the door. Calvin stood, walked to the porch, and opened it to find Sheriff Tom brushing off snow. "Road's finally cleared enough," the sheriff said, "and her mom is on her way." Calvin stepped aside to let him in. Emily looked up when she saw the sheriff. He smiled warmly. "Hello, Emily. You're safe now? All right? Your mom was very worried, but very thankful you found help." Emily nodded. "I didn't know what to do. Made the right choice," the sheriff replied gently. They sat together for a few minutes, waiting. When headlights finally appeared in the driveway, Emily stood up quickly. Calvin opened the door, and a woman rushed in, her eyes filled with relief. She knelt beside her daughter and hugged her tightly. Whispering how worried she had been, Emily hugged back just as hard. "Thank you for taking care of my girl," Mother told Calvin with heartfelt gratitude. "She's a brave one," he replied, giving Emily a small nod. When Emily finally stepped outside with her mother, she paused. She held Calvin's coat out to him but hesitated. "It smells like the fire now," she said quietly, almost shyly. "It made me feel safe." Calvin gently took the coat but didn't put it on. "I'm glad it helped." Emily smiled, a small warm smile that reached her eyes. Then she turned to leave with her mother, waving once before getting into the car. Calvin stood on the porch long after the car drove away. The snow gentle now instead of fierce. The ranch felt quieter than before, but not in a lonely way. Something had changed in him that night. Something had warmed that he didn't even know had gone cold. He closed the door, hung the coat by the wall, and looked around his home. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt full, not empty. And though he didn't say it out loud, felt grateful that the storm had brought Emily to his path. Sometimes a simple act stopping on a snowy road, offering a warm coat, could change more than one life. And Calvin knew, deep inside, that he would never forget the small voice that had asked, "Sir, can I slip under your coat?"